I can right now, yes.
Ms. Ritchie?
Yes. Hi, good morning, Dr. Hadley.
Good morning. Before we get started, if I may wish happy birthday to Mr. Riddle this morning. It's his birthday today.
Oh,
Happy 30th.
happy birthday, Rich. Just let me know when you're ready to go live.
We are?
Okay, great. So can I call the meeting to order?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we're here October 21st, 8:30 a.m. We have a quorum for our Finance Committee meeting, and I will now call that meeting to order. And we'll start with the first item on the agenda, which is the review of the September financial report. So I'll kick that back to Rich. Thanks, Rich. Happy birthday.
Thank you. So this is the financial report through September. So we are currently projecting a year-end deficit of $2,120,187. The reason primarily for the deficit is the reopening expenditures, which currently stand at $2,675,042. We have broken it out by general education RCs, which are forecasting a positive $426,000. Special education RCs are forecasting a positive $128,000. And again, the reopening expenditures currently at $2.6 million. Some of the highlights of the RCs. RC5 Finley does have a salary savings of $76,701 for a 5th grade section. That is one section under budget. That is a recommended transfer for the board, which we'll discuss later. Holmes has a kindergarten section under budget, leaving a salary savings of $118,000. That is also a recommended transfer, which we'll discuss later. Tokenique has salary savings of $67,773 due to a kindergarten section under budget. That is also a transfer that we'll discuss later. Moving to RC11, there is salary savings of about $3,600 due to a vacancy in the assistant athletic director position. The position is posted and recruited. The recruitment is underway. I actually think we have a candidate now. Given we're not renting out our buildings through December 30th, we are forecasting less custodial overtime for the YMCA. This is leaving a projected surplus of $13,400. The weight room is currently not being utilized and is forecasting a favorable balance of $6,200. And then again, intramurals are currently not occurring. As a result, we are forecasting a partial year saving of just over $35,000. Moving to RC12 maintenance, use of field revenue has surpassed expectations, as we mentioned at the previous month. We were able to rent more of our fields out during the summer due to the virtual Darien Summer School, so that has exceeded expectations by $33,000. However, we are not renting our buildings, as mentioned earlier, at least through December 31st, so we are forecasting a deficit in building rental revenue of just over $42,000. Transportation under RC13 music is forecasted to be under budget by $6,000 as field trips are currently not underway. Moving to RC15 technology, we do have salary savings in the copy center of about $5,500. Repair and service contracts are currently forecasted as a deficit of just over $10,000. We did have a number of devices that needed to be repaired due to the deployment of techs across the district to support remote learning. We did have to outsource those. This is a pending transfer as well. RC18 personnel staff turnover has exceeded budget, and we currently have a little over $45,000 available in excess savings. Contract support is showing a savings of $36,000. The secretaries and nurses contract came in under budget. RC23, Darien Summer School, as we had mentioned in previous reports, did exceed estimates by $20,000, and that balance is also a recommended transfer later on. RC24, special education. There is salary savings from a teacher being covered due to a long-term substitute. The transportation driver also shows a positive forecast of just over $2,400, as we did have a replacement driver hired throughout the year. Tuition public schools is forecasted to be a positive $150,000 due to changes in student placements. We did want to flag something for excess costs. We had mentioned preliminarily, the state has indicated that the reimbursement rate will be between 67 and 70%. At our budgeted amount, that would be a loss of revenue of $247,000. However, the state has issued the NCEP, the net current expenditures per pupil, and that amount right now is $96,497, which is lower than the budgeted threshold of $102,000. So if you assume the new NCEP, but the lower threshold rate, we would actually be short in the budget by about $67,000. The reason for the change in the NCEP is that the state did make a change in how they calculate the NCEP. So previously they did include things like minor capital. So while it might be in our capital budget, a smaller capital item would be included in that net current expenditure per pupil. Starting this year, they decided to pull that out for all districts, which did lower our threshold amount. And we did include the state issued NCEP for all districts in Connecticut, as well as that policy change announcement. Moving to RC 25, regular transportation is forecasted at a favorable balance of just over $35,000. Again, this is due to the reduced school year of 180 days to 177 days. We are recommending that dollar amount for the transfer as well. Sewer costs are forecasted to be under budget by about $13,000. It is a look back in use from a previous year, and given that schools were closed from March to June, we obviously didn't use as much water, so that created some savings there. Property insurance is forecasted at a favorable balance of $1,100. Workers' comp is forecasted at a favorable balance of $15,000. Student accident insurance a little over $4,000. We are forecasting unemployment insurance to be in a deficit of $60,000 due to the cancellation of in-person ESY and changes in state unemployment insurance. Paraprofessionals who previously were a part of ESY are now eligible to collect unemployment insurance. So we have seen a significant uptick in unemployment expenditures. RC 26, as mentioned previously, we are forecasting a negative variance of $89,797. We currently have 35 ELP students paying tuition against a budget of 48. And we did have one student withdraw since the last month. So we do have 7 transfers for the board to consider. 6 of the 7 relate to reopening expenditures and moving savings from the budget to that RC 28. The first one is using.
You know what? I'm sorry, Rich. Sorry to interrupt. It's just that that's not under discussion right now. We do have that as a separate item number 3 to discuss. So I don't want to jump ahead too much. But what I think we should do is go back and see if any of the committee members have any questions about your presentation on the September report for fiscal year 21. So I can see John, so I'll call on John because I saw him first.
Or if there's anybody there who has a question, maybe they want to go first. I'm not, I'm not even sure who's there. But thank you. Hey, thanks, Rich. Can you, I guess the timing of the excess cost reimbursement, you know, recognizing what's now a $67,500 deficit, are we just waiting to that December 1st date?
Sure. So we do file twice a year, December 1st and then March 1st. Currently, we're working with special ed to really kind of get a handle on what we will submit. So we do create a schedule that goes student by student, determines whether or not they meet that threshold. Since the NCEP was just released relatively recently, a lot of that work has to be updated, and the special ed department is still doing a number of PPTs to determine services. So I would think that we'll have a better idea of where we'll submit probably towards the end of middle or end of November.
Okay, so this number is still pretty variable is what you're saying?
Yes.
All right, thanks.
Can I just follow up on that a little? I just wanted to thank you, Rich, for including all that information on the NCEP. That's valuable information to the board just to know where we stand in terms of what expenses will actually qualify, you know, above the per pupil cost. And that's important information for you to have as we move forward. And I just want to thank you once again for providing the committee and the board with such incredible detail, and really helps us see where we're going as uncertain as excess cost is at this point in time, as we move along, it obviously helps us to have that information. So I just want to thank you. John, did you have something you wanted to follow up on?
Yeah, and I don't know if this would be replicating something somewhere else, but as I went through these descriptions, I put a C for COVID related and NC for non-COVID related. And I don't know if it makes sense in these descriptions going forward to put a little star or C next to it, so we understand what is, from what I'm calling the normalized budget, separate that from a COVID related adjustment, because the puts and takes are, throughout this. And maybe some are difficult to define, like ELP or something, but
Sure.
I'd love to hear whether or not you think that makes sense on the descriptions, or that it gets a little too hazy or gray.
I mean, we could certainly do that for the next report. We could just, parenthesize whether we consider it a savings due to just normal operations or a COVID-related savings.
Yeah, and on the expenses side too.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Thanks.
we also have, we have the separate communication about RC 28, the new RC for COVID. We could actually just list it here as the COVID expense too.
Why don't we do that? We could add that into the verbiage of Rich's monthly report to the committee and to the board. And that way everybody can have that description of RC 28 along with all the other RCs.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I don't know if now's the right time, but one of the suggestions I had, and I think it came up at last night's Board of Finance meeting, we're working off of one budget. And if there's a way to, when we make our appropriation as a board, it's going to come from the entire budget, not just COVID related. And so verbalizing this, I'm trying to figure out the best way of presenting this, because, as we're going to look at the transfers, a lot of our puts and takes are non-COVID related, right? Like, I just look at the teacher. So I'm trying to verbalize that I'm looking, we should try to maybe form a better way to present this in the comprehensive budget, and not have two memos is I guess what I'm getting at. And I realize the need to have two memos because what you were doing with the Board of Finance, but going forward, if we can integrate all these into kind of one memo, which I think this does almost, that'd be great.
I think we can
That's fine. Sure.
integrate it in a different way.
Okay, Jill, did you have a question? I thought I saw your hand.
We can hear Jill. Jill, put your mic on, please.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Thank you, John. I have a couple, Deb. The first one is on technology, the $10,000 for the Chromebook. I know that we had a little bit of a higher error rate in some of the Chromebooks than we anticipated. Is this a spend that we are expecting we might see again throughout the year, or is this likely one time just based on this early rollout?
So we do have more devices, so I would expect it to continue. The bulk of our expenses really were to prepare for the year, getting the Chromebooks back from last year, where the students returned them right before the school year. We had to get them prepared and issued out. So a bulk of the budget has already been spent. But given that we have a decent amount more devices, there are typically sometimes small repairs where it could just be some keys or the screen. But I would expect a higher rate of repair than in the past.
Okay, thank you. On RC 18, the personnel, I know we're trying to get a more, to the extent that we can, we're looking at turnover and trying to create some trending there. If there's just a way that we can be thinking about how we would demarcate any abnormalities from this year in your,
Sure.
yeah, thank you. Under special education, oh, sorry, wait. The NCEP, is there any other area of the budget where you would anticipate that impacting our work? And if so, when you come back to the board, would you speak to that?
Sure. So I mean, the NTEP is primarily just effective of how they calculate the excess cost reimbursement.
Okay.
The higher the NCEP, the higher the threshold to meet.
Sure.
So given that the NCEP is lower, but it's also lower for all the districts now. And as we mentioned in the past, the way the state calculates excess costs is all the districts in Connecticut submit their filings. It's always higher than the allocation that the state sets aside.
Yeah.
And that's usually how they come up with their reimbursement rate. with the expectation that most districts and CEPs have fallen slightly. That pool will probably get spread out a little thinner, which could have some downward pressure even more so on the reimbursement rate. We don't know right now if that's why they were originally making the reimbursement rate at 67 to 70%, or if it's a potential that it'll be lower. All they have said is that they expect it to be between that 67 and 70.
Okay,
Yeah, that's essentially a special education indicator, but recognizing it touches everything from services to busing and
Yeah.
so on and so forth.
thank you. Specifically on the question of busing, I know that under regular transportation, we have a reduction in the busing because of the reduction to 177 days. Did we not see a corresponding reduction in special education transportation?
We're still working through that. We likely will.
Okay.
So we'll have that updated. We did get a higher increase cost in our out-of-district placement providers, which is different than our in-district. So we're kind of trying to right now balance between the two,
Okay,
but there could potentially be some savings there.
okay.
Do we have Mike there? I don't see him. I didn't want to leave him out.
He's here, yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to touch on ELP a little bit if nobody has a question right now.
Go ahead.
Just driving the withdrawal of the student and the lower enrollment, do we think that that's COVID related? Or, I mean, I'm guessing it's COVID related and people are just not sending their children because of concerns of COVID. Maybe you could,
So, I mean, talking to Laura, I mean, there is some concerns that if we were to have to go remote at some point in time, not a lot of 3 and 4 year olds want to do remote learning. So there's a bit of hesitation for parents to send their students in.
so even though we don't include that in our COVID expenses, that reduction in enrollment can be attributed.
It does have a slight correlation. Yeah.
Okay, anybody else on that? We don't hear you, John. Are you trying to speak? You good?
Sorry. That kind of falls into the gray area that it's going to be difficult to account for whether or not they're going to be recurring or not, it seems. So I guess Rich is going to have
flag that. We just have to flag that and keep an eye on that as we move ahead. Okay, if there are no more questions on the September financial results, we can move on to did someone have a question? Is that Jill?
Just back on that point of ELP, just looking at the one before RC25, the fixed cost and the unemployment. I think that additional paraprofessional unemployment also goes in that.
That's a little bit of a gray area as well.
Yeah.
The change in unemployment compensation, given the whole pandemic that started in March, obviously did have an impact, but it probably falls within that gray area that we talked about.
Thank you. Thank you, Deb.
Okay, so if we're ready, if everybody's okay.
Sorry, I'm a little off base here today. Just in terms of the transfer selection, and I should have waited for transfers. Wait, go ahead, Deb. Sorry.
Yeah, let's just hold off and talk about transfers under that agenda item. So if we're all set on fiscal year September report, maybe we can move on to the projected expenses for COVID, the next item. So I'll kick it back to Rich for that.
So we did provide an update on the reopening expenditures. One of the things we mentioned at the last board meeting was the unknown cost for adding additional cleaning on Saturdays. We do have that cost, and it is included, estimated for the full year at $251,250. We did include, there's 19.2 FTEs within the COVID budget, which includes 7 elementary teachers, the 4 campus monitors, the 2 technicians, the 6.0 lunch monitors, and the 0.2 nurse. The district has been approved for 2 grants, the first one being the Esser Grant. We did mention this last night at the Board of Finance. We did receive those funds. The $134,000 in total is with Darien and received. The $347,000 coronavirus relief fund was approved by the State Department, but they have not released it to be drawn down yet. We're expecting that to be drawn down in full in the month of November. The one stipulation is that the grant has to be expended in full by December 30th. So the state did now submit a request that allows districts to reallocate some of those costs. It doesn't change the total dollar amount. So in the schedule, you'll see about $12,000 that's currently in a staffing line item. That'll probably get reallocated to facilities. So the total dollar amount won't change, but it'll likely be that We're going to apply those funds to plexiglass primarily and the hand washing stations, since those have already been purchased, the bills have already been cut, because we do have to prove that we actually paid for certain items rather than say that they're encumbered in a future expense. So we'll have that change for the next month, but obviously it won't change the actual dollar amount, just the line item that it's applied to. So total spending is $3,157,149. We did make a slight change to the schedule just for ease of readership. So we did show the total projection, which I mentioned at the 2.675. We do have the 2 grants. So the total spending is $3.1 million. We do have those proposed transfers, if approved, that would bring that cost down by $315,000. And then backing out the 2 grants of totaling $482,000, it would leave your net cost, assuming the transfers are approved currently in the operating budget, at $2.3 million.
Sorry, I'm muted. Just for that item that you were mentioning about the Corona relief funds, it's the 12,497 that we see under custodians right now?
So you'll see, so right now we have it allocated to the 12,000 under the part-time custodians, the plexiglass partitions, PPEs, and then some custodial supplies. So we're likely going to reallocate the part-time custodian and the custodial supplies, since the custodial supplies are really reoccurring expenses that happen throughout the year. And we'll really reallocate that to the plexiglass partitions. And I believe we'll probably reallocate it to the hand washing stations and pull the money out of the PPEs, the part-time custodians, and the custodial supplies. Primarily because I said we've already purchased the plexiglass, we've already purchased the hand washing stations. Those other items are reoccurring expenditures that are going to go past the month of December. So we want to make sure that we get everything in full and get the full drawdown of the grant before December 30th.
Okay, and just on to grants. Last night during the Board of Finance meeting, there was some discussion about the potential for any additional funding. So maybe we could just touch on that a little bit, if you could update the committee. I think it sounds like if there's uncertainty, but there is a potential for additional funding.
Sure. So the state did send an email out not that long ago saying that they were going to send another survey out to school districts to find out about unexpended funds, unexpected funds related to the reopening of schools and coronavirus. So some districts did not actually fill out the survey that happened that was the cause to actually create the coronavirus relief grant. So we did fill out that survey, which is why we received that $347,000. Because some districts did not actually fill that out, they're left with the balance of unused funds. And so the anticipation is that they're going to open that up again to districts. I think those districts that chose not to fill out that survey will probably be enticed to fill out that survey, which will dilute the pot a little bit. But based on their preliminary indications, we are expecting probably something small to come out. They did say the end of October, which is basically right around now, but we have not seen a survey yet.
Okay, and I just, during the conversation last night at the Board of Finance meeting, there was some discussion about timing for appropriation, and I was hoping on this agenda item, maybe the committee could opine on that, and I will let everybody know where I stand on that. I think going forward, the Board of Finance has asked for us to look at basically when we would run out of appropriation and then backtrack into approval. I'm a little concerned about that process because we're not supposed to spend money that has not been appropriated. So I think in my view, I think this process needs to start a little sooner than that. But maybe if Rich could give us an idea of when the end date would be and when we would have to, I guess the process would be Board of Finance approval, then RTM approval, which in my view can take about a month or so. So I think we need to know as a committee and then as a full board when we really need to start this process. And in my view, it's probably sometime in January, looking for an appropriation by sometime late February. But I would love to hear from Rich when you think it would be an appropriate time to start that. And Dr. Adley too, of course, and the committee as well. Thanks.
So just in terms of your budget, the month in which you have the biggest cash drawdown in your budget is June. So the teachers who will elect to get 26 checks get a balloon check in June. So your biggest cash drawdown is in the month of June. So given that we're about $2.3 million, assuming the transfers are approved, you'd obviously want to get an appropriation no later than June 1st. If you were to decide you wanted to do this in stages, where maybe you wanted to go for 2 appropriations, which is something that other districts like New Canaan, for example, they did go into 2 separate instances for appropriations. I think you're probably right that the process would probably take about 6 weeks. Typically, you would have a Board of Ed approve whatever the appropriation amount would be, and then it would go to the Board of Finance for approval. And once they approved, it would go to the RTM. So just in terms of the number of meetings and schedule, it would probably take about 6 weeks. So I would think if you're going to go for more than 1 appropriation, you're probably looking late January as the time to start. If you wanted to do 1 large appropriation, you probably would want to do it no later than April.
And if the Board of Finance, which they requested last night, continue to get the updates on a monthly basis, they certainly will have a good picture of it. It depends how much you want them to integrate the thing into the actual budget discussion, and hopefully it doesn't get messy in that capacity, but certainly early on in the new year to try and make a decision as to when we're going to do this would be appropriate.
Well, I think either way, we're going to back into the
Yep.
fiscal year 22 budget process, because that process starts in January and it doesn't end until
Yep.
April. So we're going to have to be running parallel tracks no matter how we slice it. So I see your hand, John. Did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, Deb, you made a great point. And as a member of the Board of Education, I don't want to become personally liable for these expenses, given some unknown. So I think I like the idea of maybe 2 appropriations, a large one starting in, January based on these expenses, and then maybe a cleanup one towards the end of the year. There's so many unknowns with this virus and in the world today. I'd like to get some certainty, from the Board of Finance and RTM earlier in the calendar year 2021 than mid-calendar year 2021. And Dr. Adley brought up an important point. I think if we, start the process, even set out a calendar by the end of this year and start the process as a Board of Education, we can at least get 1 appropriation done sometime, at least appropriation request done sometime in the month of January. And it would kind of separate a bit from the traditional budget discussions, because I've been through this a lot in town government. Things start to get messy and misunderstood. So if we can get 1 largely out of the way before the April timeframe, that would be great, in my opinion.
Thanks, John. Did Jill or Mike want to opine on that?
Yeah, this is Mike.
Mike, we need your mic. Thank you.
This is Mike. I agree with you, Deb, and I agree with John. I think it would be prudent to start the process in January. If that means 2 appropriation requests, so be it.
I'm in agreement. So Jill.
Okay, thanks, everybody. I think that's something that the full board should opine on. So maybe that's something we should bring to discuss at our next meeting, so everyone has an opportunity to voice their opinions on that. Does anyone have any specific questions about that overview that Rich just gave us on the reopening expenses? John?
Hey, Rich, one of the questions I had is, we're looking at these grants as kind of contra expenses from an accounting standpoint, or basically netting the expenses out from the monies coming in. From an accounting standpoint, should these be considered revenues in COVID revenues? If you want to put it in RC 28, I'd love to hear your opinion.
Sure. So the reason we're doing it as contra expenses is in order to get the grant, we have to actually submit for a specific item, and it's considered a reimbursable grant. So it's actually going against that one specific item as a reimbursement. So we can't apply for the grant and then decide, rather than using it, let's say on plexiglass, we want to use it on a teacher. It would get flagged in the audit and considered impermissible, and we'd actually end up having to pay it back, which is why we're showing it as a contra expense.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sure.
So on that note, though, you just talked about moving
Sure.
from the staffing. Can you
So we
address that?
actually have to submit to the State Department what items we want to reallocate. So the process would be, we've already submitted the items, then we'll actually submit what the new items are and the explanation as to why we want to change it. One of the reasons they're allowing us to do that, and all districts to do that, is they actually just announced only about a week and a half ago that they want all funds expended by December 30th. So a lot of districts who receive a significant amount of funds were planning on using it for a lot of personnel, and those personnel costs would go throughout the end of June. Now they're not able to do that, so they have the opportunity to reallocate those costs.
I had one other one, Deb. Rich,
Go ahead,
on
John.
RC 28, when you go through kind of the budget, these pages,
Yep.
Is there any way that you can get more descriptive or better descriptions in that description line versus just kind of a teacher? Is that limited by the software, or is it something that you can modify?
So we can modify it. It pulls off of Munis, whatever the GL account code is, but we can change the name. Or we can even break it out into further accounts. So one of the large accounts is that reserved for emergency repairs. We can actually segregate that out more into individual line items if it's helpful.
Yeah, I think just from a following standpoint, it would be nice to see which teacher in this actually, presentation or in this description, so we can literally follow teacher by teacher, in that RC, where they were applied. So
you want to
again,
see third grade Henley teacher.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's something that you can do, Rich, where you can kind of go back to the detail you've given us on your spreadsheet and tie that into the financial presentation?
Yep. So we can change the account number to not say, let's say classroom teachers, but Henley third grade or home second grade, et cetera.
Awesome. Thank you.
I would recommend that we keep this running Excel spreadsheet because it's the one now that certainly
Yes.
the Board of Finance is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Don't do away with that spreadsheet. It's fantastic.
And is it possible that you send that out to us so we can kind of play with the numbers and that sort of thing?
Sure.
Thanks.
Any other, Jill, I see your hand.
Thank you. So Rich, on that note, there are two other things that we see in the memo. Or throughout the discussion, there's lost revenues and there's offsets. What is your plan for tracking those from an accounting perspective? Are you looking at, for example, let's take offsets, looking at moving some of those into 28 or 29? How are we thinking of getting a very clear picture of offsets and revenue from an accounting perspective?
In terms of, let's say, like the building revenue rental and the field rental revenue, considering it's largely a wash, we were able to generate significant more field revenue rentals as opposed to building rentals. We're just really going to highlight those two deficits in the account. They close the gap relatively close, so we're not expecting to move those to RC 28. ELP tuition, it's one of those gray areas again. I think what will end up happening is as the year progresses, we have really one of two options. We can bring a transfer forward that would extinguish that deficit within the revenue account, or similar to last year where we had a deficit in the amount of revenue budgeted versus received for excess cost. We left that deficit alone for the whole year. So it was highlighted that we did not receive what we budgeted, but we knew in other places within the budget there were corresponding savings that could offset that deficit, so you didn't actually go negative for the end of the year. So if we looked at last year as an example, we knew we didn't use budget control. So we had about $260,000 in savings, but we also had over $200,000 in lost revenue. So we knew internally that they were a wash, but we wanted to make sure that the public knew and the board knew where those revenue offsets really were.
Okay. And what about the offsets?
In terms of just
Clear accounting, so we can see, it's helpful to see it in the memo, but again, from an accounting perspective, so at the end of the year when we tie up our numbers.
So typically you would actually just show the positive variance in one account and then the negative variance in the other account. You don't always have to actually close them.
Okay.
The only times you would want to do that is if you don't have a clear offset,
Okay.
because you obviously don't want to run into a deficit.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else on the COVID expenses, the reopening expenses? Okay. If not, we're going to move on to the budget transfers. So Rich, if you could just give us a quick overview of what we've already seen them and talked about them a little bit, but if you could just give us a quick overview of those.
So there's 7 transfers in total. 6 of them relate to the reopening expenditures. We did try to recommend a transfer from the existing school enrollment savings to a COVID teacher. So for example, the savings in Henley due to under enrollment, we recommended moving those savings to the Henley teacher that was added to reopening. So you'll see that with Henley, you'll see that with Holmes, and you'll see that with Tokenique. If that individual teacher who's in the RC 28 had insurance, we also recommended moving the money to cover that teacher's insurance as well. We did recommend covering the Royal fourth grade teacher. There were no salary savings through lower enrollment, but we did, as I mentioned earlier, have savings in transportation from going from that 180 to 177 school days. And then we also had additional revenue that exceeded budget for Darien and summer school. So those two combined to cover that fourth grade teacher at Royal. If they're approved, 4 of the 7 teachers would be covered that are in that COVID RC 28 budget. And then the one non-COVID transfer that's out there is the $10,000 to support repairs for Chromebooks. That is being recommended to be funded through salary savings through turnover.
Okay. Thank you, Rich. I appreciate this level of detail and transparency when it comes to these transfers. Some of these, because they're salaries, I don't even know if they would really qualify as a transfer that the board would need to approve, but I do think we should put it before the board because they're all COVID related, and I want to just make sure that everything is out there for discussion for the board. So I appreciate all of this coming forward to the board, and thank you for the level of detail. Do we have any questions from the committee on these transfers? I see John.
So, sorry, I keep going first because you see me. So thanks, guys, who made it. But is the reason we're approving them, the transfers as a board, because they're changing RCs from 5 to 28?
Because RC 28 is a new RC and it was created kind of off budget cycle, when I discussed it with Dr. Adley, I thought it would be more appropriate to bring anything that goes into RC 28 as a board approved budget transfer. So what Deb said, typically if it's salaries to salaries, it's just an internal budget adjustment. But because it was a newly created RC off budget cycle, we felt it was more appropriate to kind of at least highlight that for board approval.
That's awesome. Thanks for doing that. And then I was going to ask why these 5 transfers were selected first, but I think you explained it. You wanted to match teacher to teacher as much as possible.
Right.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions on the transfers? Jill or Mike? I can't see Mike, but.
No, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so if we're all set with the transfers, we can move on. We can move on to public comment then.
Good morning. If you would like to speak during public comment, click the participants icon on the bottom of your Zoom screen. Next, click the raised hand option. When it is your turn to speak, the facilitator will identify you and announce that you're unmuted for public comment. Once recognized and unmuted, please state your name and address. You will have up to 3 minutes to comment. Stacy TA, you are unmuted and recognized.
Good morning. My name is Stacy TA. I live at 10 Clocks Lane. First, I heard a rumor that it might be Rich's birthday, so I just wanted to say happy birthday. Second, I wanted to say thank you, Deb and Rich, for this very clear and detailed meeting today and presentation. As a member of F&B, I don't speak on behalf of F&B, but as a member of F&B, I would agree with you that it's better to come with an appropriation request sooner rather than mix it up during the budget process because it can get very confusing. It'll help us on F&B to be able to clearly articulate the differences between the budget and your appropriation request. Thank you.
There are no more raised hands at this time.
Okay, with that, I'm going to call for the meeting to be adjourned, and I thank everybody for attending today.